They say the strongest businesses are built on trust. I used to believe that. I used to believe that if you had loyalty at home and loyalty at work, nothing could break you. I was wrong. My name is Andrew Carter, and 10 years ago, I built a construction company from nothing. Just my hands, my back, and a stubborn refusal to quit. My wife, Julia, stood beside me through it all, or at least, that's what I thought. Together, we took a dream and turned it into a real company with trucks, crews, contracts, and clients. But behind the hard hats and balance sheets, betrayal was growing like rot in the foundation, and I was too blinded by trust to see it. When Julia and I first started, we were broke. We had one old pickup, a second-hand toolbox, and an apartment that barely fit us and our dreams. I worked 12, sometimes 14 hours a day swinging hammers, laying brick, pouring concrete, anything to get our name out there. Julia took side jobs as a bookkeeper, sometimes waiting tables at night, just to keep groceries on the table. We sacrificed everything together. Vacations, dinners out, even our honeymoon plans. When other couples were traveling the world, we were sitting at a card table in our tiny kitchen, sketching business plans on napkins. And for a long time, that bond, the bond of sacrifice, felt unshakable. Eventually, the company began to grow. Carter and Mason Construction, named after me and my best friend, Richard Mason. Richard had been with me since high school. We'd grown up together, built forts together, got into fights, and out of trouble together. When I needed someone to help me turn my dream into a business, Richard was the only person I trusted. He had the charisma I lacked, smooth with clients, always knowing what to say in a pitch meeting. I handled the work on site. He brought in the contracts. Julia, with her accounting background, became our CFO. It was perfect. I ran the field, Richard ran the deals, Julia ran the numbers. At least, that's how it looked. The first sign of something off was subtle. During meetings, Julia and Richard started whispering to each other, little side conversations I wasn't a part of. When I asked what it was about, they'd laugh it off. Just a detail you wouldn't care about, Andy. Number stuff. I told myself not to overthink it. They were just comfortable with each other. After all, we were a team, weren't we? But then came the late nights. Julia started staying at the office long after I came home from the sites. Just balancing the books, she'd say. You wouldn't understand. It's technical. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. She was my wife. She was the woman who'd eaten ramen noodles with me when we had nothing. The woman who once sat with me in a cold truck, wrapped in blankets, planning the life we'd one day have. But a shadow had started creeping across our marriage. One night, I walked into the office late to grab some contracts. I heard Julia and Richard in the conference room. Their voices dropped the second I entered, their laughter cut off like a light switch. Julia looked flushed, Richard avoided my eyes. Long day, Julia said too quickly, sliding papers into a folder. Richard clapped me on the back like he always did, only this time it felt forced. I told myself I was imagining things. But the truth? My instincts were screaming. Then came the day that changed everything. I was at the office early, before anyone else. Julia had left a bank statement sitting on her desk. It wasn't like her to be careless. She was meticulous with paperwork. But there it was, plain as day. I should have looked away. I should have respected her privacy. But something made me look. My blood ran cold. There were large transfers, tens of thousands, moving from our company account into another account I didn't recognize. And the account wasn't under Carter and Mason. It was under Julia's name. I sat there staring at the numbers, my hands trembling. The money was gone. Not invested, not allocated, just gone. Julia had been quietly bleeding our company dry. And I had no idea why. Backhand index pointing right, let me ask you. If you found a bank statement showing your own spouse was moving money behind your back, what would you do? Confront them immediately, or keep quiet and dig deeper like I did? Drop your answer in the comments. Fire, and don't forget, subscribe to Sweetest Revenge for more stories where loyalty turns to betrayal and patience brings the mask crashing down. That night, I lay in bed next to Julia, listening to her steady breathing. And I wondered, was she just protecting us from something I didn't understand? Or was she protecting herself? I didn't know it yet, but the woman who once promised me forever was already chiseling away at everything I'd built, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. And I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went. I couldn't get that bank statement out of my head. Every number burned into my mind like a brand. Tens of thousands of dollars. Money that should have been going into payroll, equipment, taxes, gone. And all of it flowing quietly into an account with Julia's name. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was setting up a reserve account. Maybe she was investing in something to help us grow. She was the CFO, after all. She handled things I didn't always understand. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I asked her casually over coffee. "Hey, Jules, I saw a bank statement on your desk. What's that second account for?" She didn't miss a beat. She smiled sweetly, took a sip, and said, "Oh, just an overflow account. Nothing to worry about. You get so stressed about money. Andy, you really should let me handle it." I nodded, forced a smile. But my stomach nodded. Because here's the thing. I wasn't a finance guy, but I wasn't an idiot either. And what I'd seen wasn't overflow. It was siphoning. So I decided to test her. That week, I brought it up again, this time more directly. "Jules, I noticed some big transfers. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. That's a lot of overflow. You sure everything's okay?" Her eyes hardened just slightly before she softened her tone. "Andy, you don't get how accounting works. You've always been great with people, with the guys on the crews, with the projects. But the numbers? That's my domain. You're tired, you're stressed. You're starting to imagine problems that aren't there." Gaslighting. Pure and simple. And the worst part? She wasn't alone. Because when I tried to talk to Richard about it, he backed her up. "Come on, Andy. You know Julie is the sharpest with numbers. She's probably moving things around to keep us protected. You and I wouldn't understand half of what she's doing." Half. Maybe more. I wanted to believe them both. My wife and my best friend. The two people I trusted most in the world. But there was something in their tone, a practiced smoothness, like they'd rehearsed the lines. Meanwhile, things at home got colder. Julia barely touched me anymore. Late nights at the office became routine. When she was home, her phone was glued to her hand. Her laptop snapped shut the second I walked into the room. And every time I asked if something was wrong, she'd sigh, roll her eyes, and say, "God, Andy, not everything is about you. I'm working. I'm keeping us afloat." Afloat. Like we were drowning and I just didn't see it. That's when I made a decision. If she wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd dig it up myself. I called an old acquaintance, a CPA named Martin who'd done some consulting for us years back. I trusted him. I told him I needed a favor, that I wanted him to quietly look over our books without Julia knowing. When Martin showed up at my house 2 nights later, he had a stack of files and a grim look on his face. "Andy, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're in trouble." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He spread the papers across my kitchen table. "These transfers aren't for reserves. They're not investments. Julia's been moving money into a shell company. It's registered under her name. And here's the kicker. It's also linked to Richard's." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Richard? Are you sure?" Martin nodded grimly. "Positive. And if it keeps going like this, within 6 months your company will be insolvent. They're draining it, Andrew." I sank into a chair, head in my hands. My wife. My best friend. The people I'd sacrificed everything with. The people I trusted more than anyone else on this earth. And they were bleeding me dry. Martin lowered his voice. "You can't confront them yet. If you do, they'll cover their tracks. You need to be smart. Quiet. Collect evidence." I looked up at him, my vision blurry with rage and betrayal. "They're destroying everything I built." He shook his head. "No, Andy. They're destroying themselves. You just need to let them." That night, Julia came home late again. She smelled faintly of expensive cologne that wasn't mine. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, opened her laptop, and started typing away. I watched her, every keystroke like a dagger. And I knew, whatever game she and Richard were playing, I was done being the fool. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if you found out your spouse and best friend were secretly draining your company behind your back? Would you confront them head on, or would you bide your time and build the case like I did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Fire, and don't forget, subscribe to Sweetest Revenge for more stories where betrayal strikes from the people you trust most, and revenge is the only cure. That night, lying awake beside Julia, I stared at the ceiling and felt the world tilt beneath me. I had a choice. Explode now and lose everything, or wait. Wait until the cracks in their lies split wide open. And deep down, I already knew which choice I'd make. Martin's warning echoed in my head for days. They're draining it, Andrew. Don't confront them yet. Let them destroy themselves. But it's one thing to hear advice. It's another thing to live with the poison of suspicion inside your own home. Julia's laptop clicked late into the night, her phone buzzing with messages she never let me see. Richard's calls came at odd hours, his voice dropping when I entered the room. At the office, they shared glances that weren't just professional. They were conspiratorial. And the worst part? They acted like I was invisible, like I was already gone. One Friday afternoon, I walked into the conference room to grab blueprints I'd left behind. I stopped cold when I heard my own name. Julia's voice, sharp but hushed. He won't even know what hit him. By the time he realizes, his name won't even be on the paperwork. Richard chuckled. We'll frame it as a transition, his retirement. The board will buy it. Hell, half the time he's out on job sites anyway. They'll think it's natural. My chest tightened. Retirement? Transition? My name off the paperwork? I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. Julia's tone softened, almost mocking. He's too trusting, Rich. Always has been. He signs whatever I put in front of him. Remember last week? He didn't even read it, just signed. They both laughed. And in that moment, I realized the depth of it. This wasn't just money siphoned off the books. This was a coup. They weren't just draining the company. They were planning to erase me from it entirely. I left quietly, fists clenched, rage boiling so hot it blurred my vision. I wanted to storm back in, flip the table, scream at them until the walls shook. But Martin's words returned like an anchor. Don't confront them yet. So I swallowed the rage. And I started watching even closer. Over the next few weeks, I began secretly copying every document Julia handed me. Every routine paper she slid across my desk, every contract she insisted needed a quick signature. I took them home, scanned them, locked them away. And that's when I found it. Buried in a stack of quarterly forms was a document labeled Ownership Restructure Agreement. My eyes scanned line after line until I found it. Language that shifted controlling interest of Carter and Mason Construction to Julia Carter and Richard Mason. My own name, was reduced to a silent partner, stripped of authority. And my signature was already on it. But here's the catch. I didn't remember signing it. That's when it hit me. Julia hadn't just manipulated me into signing blindly. She'd forged. The loops and slants of the ink matched mine almost perfectly, but there were tells, subtle differences in pressure, spacing. I knew my signature, and this wasn't it. I sat there at my desk staring at the paper, my stomach dropping like a stone. My wife, my best friend. They hadn't just lied, they hadn't just stolen. They'd falsified my name to erase me from my own life's work. The betrayal was total. But instead of despair, something else sparked inside me. Clarity. They thought they were brilliant. They thought they were untouchable. But arrogance always leaves fingerprints. And now, I had the first real crack in their perfect facade. That night at home, Julia poured herself a glass of wine and slid next to me on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder, smiling faintly. To anyone else, it might have looked like a picture of a loving marriage. But I knew better. Her head rested on the same shoulder she was stabbing. She whispered, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I forced a smile, steadying my voice. "Just tired. You know how it is." She kissed my cheek, as if to seal the lie. And I thought, keep smiling, Julia. Keep playing your part. Because I'm done being your fool. From now on, I'm the one keeping secrets. Backhand index pointing right, let me ask you. What would you do if you discovered your spouse forged your signature to erase you from your own company? Would you confront them on the spot, or would you stay silent and build the trap like I did? Tell me in the comments. Fire, and don't forget, subscribe to Sweetest Revenge for more stories where betrayal hides in plain sight, until patience tears the mask away. From that day forward, every signature I gave, every document I touched, I made a copy. Every late-night whisper I overheard, I wrote down. Because they hadn't just made me a victim. They'd made me a witness. And soon enough, the evidence would tell the story they couldn't talk their way out of. After I discovered the forged signature, something inside me changed. Up until then, I was angry, hurt, betrayed. But once I saw proof, undeniable proof, that Julia and Richard were planning to erase me completely, the anger hardened into something sharper. Focus. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to storm into the office and accuse them in front of the staff. That's what they expected me to do, blow up, lose my temper. Make myself look unstable. No. If Julia and Richard wanted to play chess, then chess it would be. And I was ready to sacrifice nothing. The first move was quiet. I met with Claire Reynolds, a corporate lawyer Martin recommended. I laid out everything: the bank statements, the shell company transfers, the forged signature. She flipped through the evidence carefully, her brow tightening with each page. "Andrew," she said finally, "this isn't just unethical. This is criminal. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement. They've left a paper trail wide enough to drive a truck through. If you push this to court, they'll burn." I leaned forward. "But if I move too soon, they'll bury the evidence. I need them to feel safe enough to expose themselves fully." Claire smiled slowly. "Then we give them the rope. You just keep playing the role of the trusting husband and partner. Meanwhile, we'll build your arsenal." And that's exactly what we did. Every night after Julia fell asleep, I slipped downstairs, spread the documents across the dining table, and cataloged everything with Martin's help. Transfers, dates, signatures, emails. Claire had me sign affidavits for each discovery, time-stamped and notarized. We weren't just collecting papers. We were building a case no jury could ignore. Meanwhile, Julia and Richard were getting bolder. They started showing up to meetings without me. Board members told me Richard had mentioned I was slowing down and thinking of retiring. Retiring? I was working harder than ever. That lie wasn't meant for me. It was meant for them, laying the groundwork. At home, Julia grew more distant, but also more confident. She walked taller, laughed louder, spent money like water. I came across receipts for dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, charges for hotel rooms I'd never seen. I bit my tongue, smiled when she brushed it off, and filed the evidence away. Because here's the thing about people drunk on power: they get sloppy. One night, I accidentally left a voice recorder in the conference room. When I came back the next morning, I played it in my car. Julia's voice, sharp and decisive. "The meeting's set for next month. We'll announce Andrew's transition out, present the restructure, and move forward as joint majority holders. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." Richard chuckled. "He'll probably thank us for taking the burden off his shoulders." That recording became the crown jewel of my collection. The irony? While they plotted to erase me, I was building the very case that would erase them. But keeping up the act wasn't easy. Every morning, I had to look Julia in the eye and pretend nothing was wrong. Pretend her kiss on my cheek didn't make my skin crawl. Pretend I didn't know about the secret account, the forged papers, the whispered plans with Richard. It was like living in a play, rehearsing lines I didn't believe, waiting for the curtain to rise. The stress ate at me. Nights were long, sleep came in fragments, and every knock on the door made my pulse spike. But then I'd open the safe, run my hand across the neatly stacked files, and remind myself: patience. Let them think they've won. Then take everything back in one strike. The final confirmation came in the form of an embossed envelope. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped across my desk with Julia's flawless smile. "Big day next month," she said, almost too casually. "Board meeting. We'll all be there." I opened it later in private. Inside was the official invitation, the quarterly shareholders meeting. The agenda listed ownership transition announcement. Ownership transition. They weren't even hiding it anymore. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed on me. The years of work, the sweat, the sacrifices, the nights Julia and I had gone without just to make payroll. All of it being stolen by the two people I trusted most. But then the rage cooled into steel. This was it. The stage was set. I closed the invitation, slid it into the safe with the rest, and whispered to myself: "You've written the play, Julia. Now let's see how you like opening night." Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if your spouse and best friend plotted to push you out of your own company? Would you blow the whistle right away, or let them stand on stage and expose themselves in front of everyone? Share your answer in the comments. Fire, and don't forget, subscribe to Sweetest Revenge for more stories where betrayal digs deep and revenge rips out the roots. The date of the meeting was circled on my calendar in red. Every day closer was another step toward their downfall. And when that day finally came, Julia and Richard wouldn't just lose the company. They'd lose everything. The day of the shareholders meeting felt like the longest morning of my life. I woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every betrayal in perfect clarity. Julia's late-night office hours. Richard's chuckle in the conference room. The forged signature. The bank transfers. All the moments I'd swallowed my anger. All the nights I'd clenched my jaw and played the fool. It all came rushing back. But now, the waiting was over. I put on my suit slowly, button by button, steadying my hands. When Julia came down the stairs, she looked radiant, confident. She wore her power like perfume, every detail curated to project success. "Big day," she said, smoothing her blazer. "You ready?" I forced a smile. "More than ready." We drove together, just like old times. But the silence between us wasn't the silence of comfort anymore. It was the silence of two people walking into a battlefield. Only one of us knew who would walk out whole. The boardroom was full. Investors, shareholders, department heads, all dressed sharp, murmuring over coffee and handshakes. Richard was already there, charming as always, slapping backs, cracking jokes. When he saw me, he clasped my hand firmly. "Andy, glad you made it. This is going to be a big day for all of us." I nodded, my face unreadable. "Yeah, Rich. Huge day." The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, quarterly numbers, project updates, forecasts. Then Julia stood, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her voice smooth and practiced. "As you all know, Carter and Mason Construction has been through incredible growth these past few years. None of it would have been possible without Andrew's hard work. But as every great leader knows, there comes a time to pass the torch." The words were a knife, delivered with a smile. "Today," she continued, "we're proud to announce a transition of ownership. Richard Mason and I will be taking on majority control, ensuring the future of this company remains bright." There were polite nods, a few scattered claps. Julia beamed, Richard grinned, and for a moment, they looked unstoppable. Until I stood. "Before we move forward," I said, my voice calm, "I'd like to share a few documents with the board." Claire appeared at the back of the room, carrying a thick binder and a laptop. She handed them to me, and I began distributing copies to the board members. Julia's smile faltered. Richard shifted in his seat. "These," I continued, "are financial records. Records showing large transfers from Carter and Mason construction accounts into a shell company owned by Julia Carter and Richard Mason." Murmurs rippled across the table. Julia laughed nervously. "Andrew, this isn't the time." I raised a hand. "It gets better. Here are notarized affidavits, copies of documents I supposedly signed. Only I didn't. My signature was forged. Right here, in this so-called ownership restructure agreement." I held up the paper, letting the forged signature gleam under the lights. Gasps filled the room. A board member squinted, flipping through the binder. This is fraud." Richard leaned forward, sweat beading at his temples. "This is nonsense. He's twisting numbers, trying to cling to power." I pressed a button on the laptop, and the room filled with voices. Julia's, sharp and clear. "He won't even know what hit him. By the time he realizes, his name won't even be on the paperwork." Then Richard's chuckle. "He'll probably thank us for taking the burden off his shoulders." The boardroom erupted. Chairs scraped. Voices overlapped, outrage spilling across the table. Julia's face drained of color. Richard's jaw hung open. I looked at them both, steady and calm. "You thought you were erasing me, but all you erased was your own future. This company was built on trust, and you broke it." The board didn't hesitate. A vote was called. Julia and Richard were removed effective immediately, pending legal action. Claire slid another folder across the table, this one addressed to investigators already waiting outside. Security entered quietly, escorting Julia and Richard from the room as shareholders stared in disbelief. Julia's eyes locked on mine, a mix of fury and panic. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time, Julia Carter had nothing to say. And in that silence, I felt the weight lift. The company was safe. My name was safe. And the people who betrayed me were finally unmasked. Backhand index pointing right, let me ask you. If your spouse and your best friend plotted to steal everything from you, would you forgive them for the years of trust? Or would you let them fall exactly as they deserved? Share your answer in the comments. Fire, and don't forget, subscribe to Sweetest Revenge for more stories where betrayal cuts deepest, and revenge is the only cure. When I left the boardroom that day, the air outside felt different. Lighter. I thought back to the nights Julia and I had eaten ramen, dreaming about the future. To the days Richard and I had built this company brick by brick. And I realized, those people weren't the same anymore. Julia wasn't my partner. Richard wasn't my friend. They were ghosts, hollowed out by greed. They tried to steal my company. In the end, all they stole was their own legacy. And that was the sweetest revenge.